Hello, 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 hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're watching us. We're coming to you live from, um, let's be sure everyone is on board. Okay, so hi everyone, hi Instagram, hi Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, joining us on Periscope. Thank you so much for joining us. I really want to apologize for the late start. We said we'll be starting at 4 p.m. but it's a few minutes after 4, and I really, really want to apologize for that because of technology. Technology really knows no friend. I think I confirmed this evening. So I'm very excited that we're finally coming to you live on almost 5 platforms. We thought we'd have LinkedIn, but again, technology, we've lost LinkedIn there. But we're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and a bit of Instagram. It's a bit different now for Instagram because I'm not seeing my guests. You're going to be hearing the sound, I think. If you don't, I'll have to let you go. But if you do, I'll be grateful. And if you can't, please join us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So I just want to open this up. Really, it's a conversation we're going to be having on the impact of COVID-19 and the impact that it has had on refugees. And of course, welcome to Sheila's Digitalks. This is one of the many series that we've been having. And my guest is already on standby for us. If you permit me, I'll just do a few changes here. And then I'll be able to bring in my guest. So first of all, I really want to appreciate a friend of mine called Yona. Yona is a social media um, associate at UNHCR. I'm going to have to say that a little later, but I really, really want to appreciate Yona because Yona has literally helped in the setup of this whole arrangement. If you've been following us right from when we started on Instagram in March, then you definitely know that there's been a lot of growth, and that's because of Yona. So Yona, thank you so much. I really, really want to appreciate your effort. So this evening I'm hosting Joe Butru. Joe Butru is the UNHCR Country Representative. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very sorry that we started late. The challenges of technology we clearly overestimated, but I'm glad that you can join us. I'm coming to you live from the comfort of my home. That's the most important thing. And Joel is coming to us live from the UNHCR headquarters. Joel, can you just say hi to the people watching, and then we will start.
Hello, yes, indeed. I read you loud and clear, and I'm indeed in our office in Kampala.
Okay, so let me just run a few things. I'm both my producer and my director, so I just want to run a few things on the screen so that people have an idea of what we're going to be talking about. Okay, then that should be there. Okay, so first of all, Joe, you are the UNHCR Country Representative. Could you just let us in on how the refugees or you have been coping as the people handling refugees in this country?
Yes, well, as you know, there are around over 1.4 million refugees in Uganda, which makes Uganda the third highest refugee hosting country in the world and the first in Africa. So it's a huge it's a huge number of refugees from Congo, from South Sudan, but also many other nationalities. So far, I could say that we had been coping fairly well. And first, thanks, I would say, to the pretty enlightened policy of the government. I mean, everybody knows that the Ugandan government has one of the most enlightened asylum policy, whereby refugees are not in camps, they are in settlements. They were free to move around, free to find a job, free, basically, they enjoy more or less almost the same rights as Ugandans. And you don't find that in many other countries in the world. So Despite all the financial difficulties that we keep having, it's a recurrent issue. I think that, thanks to good cooperation also of the government, all the other partners, I think the refugees here enjoyed probably, fairly adequate, it's a big word, but adequate life in Uganda. And the proof is that they kept coming until recently. Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, if you can hear me, how has the pandemic affected your work or the kind of work that you've been dealing in?
Well, indeed, that's why I said a lot of things in the past tense in my first introduction, because the pandemic obviously is hitting very hard, first a good chunk of humanity, but also the most vulnerable, the poorest. In fact, even as you know, in Europe, in the US, and so on, the COVID-19 as a disease has affected a lot of the minority groups much more than the wealthier groups. So here, of course, the impact of the disease itself is not as hard because we have only around slightly over 600 cases and 0 casualties so far, I should emphasize. And also the government has, I think, put in place a fairly watertight system in terms of trying to control the pandemic. But despite that, if you want, as a secondary effect of the measures put in place to control the pandemic, of course, the government has closed the borders, the whole country was landlocked until recently, so movements were not free anymore and so on. And this really has had a major impact on the refugees, on many, again, poor Ugandans, those Ugandans who are selling things, who are having their shops on. Those have been very heavily impacted by the measures put in place to control the pandemic. The same applies for refugees. Refugees were a lot relying not only on what the international community, UNHCR, World Food Program, and others were giving to the refugees, but the refugees were relying a lot on crossing the border, for example, to try to cultivate a bit the plot of land, to diversify and to complement whatever they were receiving, or they would typically work in another village, tilling the ground for other Ugandans. All this has stopped overnight, which means that overnight, a lot of what used to be constituted their livelihoods and enabled them to survive a bit better stopped. And that has had a very heavy impact on the lot of the refugees. Even more so as it coincided, if you want, with a decrease in the food ration, because the World Food Program is having also, like us, a lot of financial constraint. So it coincided with decreasing resources, and also coincided at a time when indeed schools were closed. So as a result, if you want, the children could not anymore benefit from the canteen that they used to have, those who had that at school. So there has been, if you want, a multiplier effect, which translated into sudden and increased hardship for the refugees. And in fact, if I may say, we have seen immediately how this increased hardship translated. It translated into increased violence a bit. We have seen increased gender-based violence. We have seen increased attempts at suicide, at committing suicide. We have seen increased violence even within clans. All that also is a reflection of this increased hardship, increased boredom. So with that comes probably more drinking and so on. So a lot of risky behaviors, which makes that life in the settlements, in the villages, is getting much and much harder.
Okay, do we have any statistics, or would you know if we've registered any domestic violence cases within the settlements? Because as we know it here in, where the general population, there's been an increase. There's been an increase in the number of domestic violence cases. So I don't know if this is the same situation in the refugee settlements.
It is indeed, you're right, Sheila, it is the same situation, maybe compounded by the fact that refugees live in these sort of villages, but which are a bit congested villages, like the slum areas in Kampala. So physical distancing is close to impossible. Wearing masks, well, it is coming gradually, but you know, so physical distancing is impossible. Boredom settles in, decreased resources. So indeed, we do see a marked increase. I don't have a statistic on top of my head, but we have a marked increase in gender-based violence, in forced early marriages. We do see that. And at a time, as I said, and the problem, what is compounded by that is that we have less resources to deal with all what we call these protection cases, including child protection, psychosocial support, you know. Let's not forget that a lot of this refugee population, the South Sudanese in particular, but also the Congolese, many of them have suffered a horrific past. So may have psychosocial problem on their own. So when you add to that this increased hardship of being confined, not being able to work and so on, it can easily degenerate.
I understand that 60% of our refugees are children. What measures are being put in place to ensure that these children don't suffer an already existing problem? They're already suffering, but they're able to sort of regain their education and sort of semblance of peace when all this is done.
No, you're right, Sheila, in terms of semblance of, because for the moment what we're trying to do is make the best out of very, very difficult situation when it comes to education. So we're trying to put in place some sort of distance learning, but you know, it's not a panacea either, it's not a magic wand. So we have some distance learning taking place. We managed to print material and distribute material that is handed over at the level of the household, of the families with children. But you know, already before the pandemic, we were only reaching, say, 65% of children who had the age to go to primary school, and maybe 15, not even 13% of secondary age, kids who should go to secondary school. So prior to the pandemic, we were, as I think, reaching 65%. Obviously, these days we're reaching even less. So it means increased boredom, increased hardship for the children. So we're trying to make up, as I said, with distance learning, but we can only go that far with distance learning also. We are not in Europe, you know, we're not wherever. Computers, electricity, and so on are not very widespread at all. So what we do is that we, as Uganda, in fact, you know, we finance or we support hours on radio, you know, also, including in the languages of the refugees. So we support that. As I said, we support with other partners like UNICEF, printing of material that we hand out. But at the end of the day, I think there is nothing like, whether we like it or not, there's nothing like the presence of a teacher. And we don't have that. And even at the end of the day, when we will be able to, when the school will reopen, we'll have a huge problem of congestion. So we're not out of the woods, basically. Even post confinement, if you want, we will have schools that will need to implement some physical distancing when you have over 100 kids sometime in classrooms. So it's going to be extremely difficult. So I think we have a long way ahead of us to try to catch up and to try to make up, for the impact of COVID-19. And we have to find creative ways, indeed a mixture of distance learning, but also, as I said, handing out, teachers maybe going to doing some sort of semi-private tuition. We'll have to find a way, in addition to indeed building more schools, having more teachers, and so on.
Okay, so I just want to pick a few comments coming in on our different platforms. On Facebook, I'll start with Rene Gatuya. He says, UNHCR is typically an agency well used to working in situations such as these ones, in shocking global problems like this. How has this one in particular been different?
Yes.
Let me see if I can put this on the screen actually.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Yes. So this one is different because it came very suddenly, I would say, for us. Although an emergency is an emergency, but also it was a combination of things. When you have an emergency, generally what we try to do is also have humanitarian corridors, enlarge our presence on the ground, get more resources to respond to the emergency, and secure access to the refugees. Here is quite the other way around. We have an emergency on our lap together with the government, and at the same time we have to reduce somewhat. We didn't reduce too much, but a bit, our physical presence. We have to rely more on the local authorities and on the local structures at a time when they are overwhelmed by all the problems they face. Plus, also, we are facing a situation whereby we're decreasing, not increasing resources. So we're used indeed to emergencies, but it was particularly difficult here to try to do additional activities with, i.e. reprogram all the activities we had, but with reduced resources, while trying also to reduce our physical presence, our footprint, and trying to support more the local authorities so that basically they make up for our reduced presence. That's what is making it complicated. In addition, as I said, what is complicated is that we're in a situation whereby the refugees see their situation worsen. Less education, they cannot move, and so on. And we don't have really any magic wand here to make up for this reduction in access to basic services like education. We don't have resources to make up for the increase in number of protection cases. I said gender-based violence, child protection.
Joe,
That's what,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, Joe, some people would argue that UNHCR should have these resources. You should be well funded and equipped.
God hears you. Well, we should be well funded, but we're not. We're not. We're spending a lot. What's keep me up at night is the fact that we have this generous asylum policy from the government. We have this over 1.4 million refugees, the largest in Africa, and we have continuously decreasing resources. And not only us, but many of the actors dealing with this sort of the so-called humanitarian activities. We should be well resourced because I think we're doing a good job. We not only UNHCR, we are partners, and first and foremost the local authorities and all the partners, you know, who are with us, the government, the office of the Prime Minister. We're working hand in hand. All is not rosy, but we're working well together. But despite that, despite the generous policy, indeed, we are struggling. To this day, we don't even have 20% of our overall need for 2020. And we are almost half through the year. So we should be well resourced. We're not. So that's why we have to continuously reprogram, to reprioritize, to make sure that the top priority of the month, you know, is taken care of. But it is at the expense of the rest. If I may, if I may add, I don't have money for education and health after September, for example, which means that if we don't get resources after June, before September, we'll have to stop financing over 4,000 teachers, the hundreds of schools we're supporting, and over 100 health centers we're supporting. That's dramatic. That's what is keeping.
What happened in that case?
Well, that's a good question. I certainly hope we won't reach this extreme, but in that case, if we don't have the resources, we don't have the resources. But I certainly hope we will be able to, but it will be again the last minute at the 11th hour. But if we don't have the resources, we have to stop the activities, which would be a disaster. You know, we can't stop education in the settlements. First, it's a fundamental human right, like health, like access to water and so on. But secondly, doing that would put not only 4,000 teachers unemployed, but you know, I don't remember exactly, 400,000 kids out of school. That would be a disaster. So certainly I
what
hope
do
it
you
won't happen.
need? Yeah. What needs to be done to avert this potential crisis, would you like?
Well, we are constantly in touch with our headquarters, with the donors here. We're reaching out to them, we're appealing to them. You know, we need $20 million more now. And I will continue the pressure. We'll continue writing to them, continue making report on the impact of lack of funding. All that we're doing, we're alerting and alerting. Probably I should do more of a broadcast like now with you, but we have to appeal. We'll have to use all the means that are at our disposal to try to save the situation. Otherwise, indeed, it would be extremely problematic.
Okay, so does that mean then that you require some sort of crowdfunding, crowdsourcing of finances? And how can an average Ugandan chip in if they like, if you know you want to help the situation? How do we come in?
Oh, you know, we of course working with the private sector is one of the priorities of UNHCR. Uh, what I could say is certainly there are mechanisms within the private sector for us to reach out to. Our contacts have been too limited. I have to be frank, honest about that. We need to increase our contact with the private sector in Uganda. And indeed, possibly, there are Ugandans who would be ready to help, which brings me back to one issue that I forgot to mention, which is a key issue. When I talk about supporting the refugees, what we're doing here in Uganda, which is special, that we're working in supporting the refugees and the host communities in the catchment area. So typically, we're supporting 1.4 million refugees plus 4 or 5 million Ugandans who are in the vicinity of the refugee settlement. So we're not only working with refugees, and that's what is also so special here. So our contribution also, or lack thereof, would impact also the well-being of the Ugandans who so much need it and deserve it. So, but definitely we need to do more to reach out to the private sector, yes.
Let me bring myself back on. Okay. There's refugee settlements, there are camps, there's that. What defines a refugee settlement and what defines a camp? And how come we only have refugee settlements and not camps in Uganda?
Yes. In fact, that's what makes the asylum policy of Uganda so generous. Here we have settlements. What are settlements? Basically, they are villages. When you talk about BDBD settlement in Yumbe district, and we talk, oh, it's a huge settlement, it's 240,000 refugees. In fact, it is distributed into 24, 26 villages. So the settlements are villages in a given area and are not at all fenced in. There are villages like other villages. It would be, in fact, you would be hard-pressed sometimes to make a difference between a Ugandan village and the refugee settlement. They are more or less the same. So that's the difference. Whereas a camp, a refugee camp, in the traditional terms, is an area that is fenced in or enclosed, and refugees don't have a free movement. Whereas, again, prior to COVID-19, refugees could go wherever they wanted in all freedom. So they might live in BDBD, but if they chose to cultivate in Arua or in Adjumani, they were free to do so, to the extent that there was land available and lent or on loan by the Ugandan communities. So that's the difference. That's why. And why is it good to have a settlement rather than a camp? Well, it's fairly simple. Since you're free to move around when in a settlement, the refugees were free to cultivate, and hence, if you want, their resilience increased. They had a cushion that enabled them to sort of face any crisis because they could go somewhere and cultivate or work here or there. So they could build a life until such time they would be ready to go back home. That's what makes a big difference between a settlement and a camp.
Okay, and I'm sure you've said this, but in case, first of all, let me welcome back. Let me just welcome our new viewers who might have just tuned in. You're watching Sheila's Digitalks. I'm coming to you live from my home, and that's with, I think, the only silver lining from COVID-19 is that it's shaken us out of our comfort zones, and we're able to work from anywhere, as it were. So we're glad that you could join us, that you could tune in. We do apologize because we said that this would also be live on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, due to technology, we somehow have lost LinkedIn and Instagram. So we are only live on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Yes, I think those three platforms. We shall try and work out how to have the rest. But I'm joined by the UNHCR Country Representative, and our topic today is the impacts of COVID-19 on refugees. So you were telling us, Mr. Joe Botru, I hope I got the name right, by the way, sir. Yeah, okay. So first of all, World Refugee Day is next week. How different are you going to celebrate World Refugee Day this year?
Well, we will celebrate it differently, obviously. Last year, for example, I was with the first Deputy Prime Minister in BDBD, and we did a big march with thousands of refugees and school children and so on. And the year before, we were in Nakivale, which is a settlement that is 62 years old. And we had a huge gathering there of several thousand people too. So this year, obviously, we cannot do a gathering. So it will be more in the shape of a media event, maybe again, press conference, op-ed. At settlement level, there will be some limited activities, some competition, I think, for whatever the most creative activity. So there will be sort of series of fairly low-key events, because it's important for us to commemorate the 20th of June, but of course we have to be realistic of what can be done. So this year, no big event, no big gathering, unfortunately, but more reliance, in fact, on you, Sheila, and the social media and the media as a whole. It's important to commemorate that because, again, Uganda is such a special country, you know, asylum country when it comes to refugees, and we have to pay tribute, I think, constantly to the policy of the government, but also to the, you know, amazing generosity of the Ugandan people, who are, you know, sometimes, let's not forget, outnumbered by a factor of 3, at least. Like, for example, you know, Bongi district, you may have a population of 40,000 Ugandans and 120,000 refugees in Palorinia settlement. So this we need to keep into account, and we have to salute the generosity of the Ugandan people.
So we've got another question here that I can flash on the screen right now. Practically, this is from Twitter. Hamim Hamson, he says, practically there might be an influx once borders open. How prepared is UNHCR in case this happens?
That's a very good question. Indeed, we should not forget that although the borders are closed, there is continuous military activities in South Sudan. There is a continuous chaos, I would say, in eastern DRC, and we know that there are people attempting to cross the border on an almost daily basis. So it is true that we fear that indeed once the border open, we may face an influx of thousands of Congolese and South Sudanese. So how prepared are we? We're prepared operationally in terms of being able to receive the refugees. We know the location where they could be received and or quarantined, if ever quarantine is still enforced. Where we have a problem again is on the financial resources, because when we receive refugees, you need to feed them, you need to give them non-food items, wood, plastic sheeting, buckets, jerry cans, whatever it takes, when refugees come and with nothing. But so we have a problem on and soap, obviously, and sanitary napkins and so on. So we definitely have a problem on that score if ever we are faced with a very large influx. Otherwise, with a small influx, we should be able to hold the fort, let's put it that way, with the office of the Prime Minister, but just barely, because again, the resources are very, very, very stretched.
So what is your biggest ask now?
My biggest ask, resources. Financial resources is really the biggest ask, which we have asked. When was that? 2 months ago, I think I asked my headquarters for $40 more million. We got zero, then we got maybe a couple of million. But the biggest ask is indeed we need now that sort of money if we want to be able to face the present situation of the COVID situation, which is requiring additional activities. If we want to be able to continue education and health activities post September, if we want to be able to enhance our outreach to the refugees in terms of protecting them, that is the type of money we're talking about. So our biggest ask is indeed financial resources. Otherwise, my biggest ask is for the Ugandan authorities to continue with the enlightened asylum policy. I would say that's certainly what I would ask. I would beg the authorities to continue. I find it remarkable that indeed, despite the pandemic also and everything, despite the lockdown, we managed to have a very, how would I say, a very practical way of working together, realistic, with the Office of the Prime Minister and everybody, and we find solutions to problems as they come. And I have a lot of respect and admiration, I would say, with the way the government is handling not only the refugee situation as a whole, but also the pandemic. And my biggest ask, if you want the last one, would be for the pandemic to stop as soon as possible.
Yeah, I guess that's everybody's ask anyway. But there's another question from Twitter. Renin Doi says, when is the priority? Where is the priority if the biggest ask, the resources, is put in your hands?
The biggest, if I had the resources, if I had to have the resources, there is not one priority, unfortunately. I would say education, definitely. And vocational training, education. We need to resume and increase our outreach to all the refugee children. That's the biggest ask, I would say. Secondly, livelihood. What we call livelihood, what is livelihood? Is all these activities, agriculture, non-agriculture, like soap making, like mask making, now in the settlements, a lot of refugees are tailoring masks also, like many people in Uganda. We need more of those livelihood activities. Because if we don't do that, in an environment when there is decreased food ration and so on, the hardship for the refugees will increase. So education, livelihood, of course we have to continue health, but that certainly that would be the biggest ask, together with protection. We need to protect the children. This is, it's a basic fundamental human right. It's our mandate also. And we need to protect the girls. We need to protect the girls from early and forced marriage. We need to bring more psychosocial support to the refugees. So these are, if you want, the priority areas.
All right, so there's another question from Katende, no, not Katende. It's Rene again from Facebook. How is access to the refugee settlements being managed following the publicized case where a refugee was tested positive while trying to cross from Tanzania to Uganda in Nakivale camp?
Okay, Rene is well informed. Well, you know, the response to the COVID-19 in refugee settlement is exactly the same as elsewhere. In fact, our response is integrated into the broader national response. So what happened typically when this person who came from Tanzania probably and who was found positive in Nakivale, what happened to him is that, of course, he was put in isolation. And like the task force at district level do throughout Uganda, they traced all the contacts, and then they put the contacts in quarantine. And that's what has happened to this refugee, like to other refugees. There are not that many who were tested positive. So the response is the same. And that's why, in fact, for the moment, touch wood, the response to COVID has been well managed here. We're doing it together with the Ministry of Health, with other partners, and so on. So you do the quarantining, the isolation, you do the tracing, and you do the treatment. So, and it is a pretty thorough job that is being done. So, and that's why, in fact, there were two refugees in Nakivale who were tested positive, were isolated, treated, and they were let go after the treatment, and then when they were tested negative. The problem is more, if I may, the management of the quarantine centers. This is a big issue for us because there are more and more people in the quarantine centers, and we need to streamline a bit the management, but we're getting there. So that's an issue that is a priority issue for us, not only for us, UNHCR, but also for the government.
This is as we conclude, because time can only permit, these different platforms can only permit us an hour, especially I think Facebook and YouTube. So we must conclude this. But I just want to know how is social distancing being observed in the settlements?
You know, I suppose you have gone to the markets around here in Kampala, and you see how it is. I mean, it is probably less crowded than what it used to be, but you still find sizable crowds, yes? So in the settlements, you know, sometimes it's a bit the same. If you go, there are still markets in the settlements. There is some measure of physical distancing, but you know, let's be honest, very limited. And that's why we try to be realistic in our expectation and try to emphasize what we can implement, like wash your hands. Try indeed to be as physically distant as possible. Wear a mask, especially if you're above 60 years of age, you know, this sort of thing. That's why we're trying to reach out to all the refugee leadership to pass on this message. But as you said, physical distancing is very difficult to implement. We try with limited success, let's put it that way.
All right, so when UNHCR, and by US I mean UNHCR, when you say that what did you say? No one is safe until everyone is safe. What do you exactly mean?
Well, by that we mean that indeed we cannot leave anybody behind. It's not because, for example, a district would have 0 case of COVID-19 that it can sort of rest on its laurel. Basically, what we mean by that is that we need to handle the pandemic, more like the refugee issue, in fact, in a comprehensive manner. We need to handle the pandemic for everybody, in particular for the most vulnerable, because these are the ones who generally tend to be those who will catch it first. So it's not because we can be sometimes in splendid isolation in our beautiful house, for example, that we're safe. We're not. We're not safe until everybody, from the poorest to maybe the wealthiest, is safe. So we cannot afford, those of us who are privileged, if you want, to forget the poorest, the most vulnerable, not only the refugees, but those in the slums of Kampala and other areas. So that's what it means. We're not safe when everybody's safe means let's focus on the most vulnerable.
Okay, so I have a friend of mine called Moses, who says he wants to contribute some money. I don't know, do you have a donation fund? Do you have, I know you already answered that, but he seems so pressed by the call for money, by the need for money that UNHCR has put across. So how can Moses contribute?
So I suppose that we have a bank account for that sort of things. What we can do is probably we will shortly issue a sort of appeal for funds. So what we will do is that we will put in there the bank account where people can contribute. By the way, we did the same. Huh? All the UNHCR staff and UN staff as a whole contributed for the response to COVID, and we put that in a bank account, and the money was handed over to the government. So, in fact, we had to start with our own home first, put our own home in order, and we did that so as well. So we will do that. We will put the bank account to which Ugandans who want to contribute something will be able to do so. I will be very grateful, by the way, because there is no such thing as a small contribution. And any contribution is very much welcome. And indeed, while the biggest contribution comes from member states, from governments, we do have also a lot of much smaller contributors, and they play a key role, not only for the contribution, but also in spreading the word and in themselves by showing an interest in the fate of the refugees. It helps us a lot because we feel that we have support from the population at large. So are we cut off?
Okay.
No.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so John Kisha on Facebook, have the reception centers been decongested, and how is social distancing applied in food distribution?
Okay, so indeed, the reception centers reception centers are centers where new arrivals before the pandemic used to be welcome. They were put there until they were registered, and from there, then they were transported to the settlement themselves. So at one point, indeed, some of the reception centers were a bit congested, but due to COVID-19, we had to accelerate the decongestion. So we emptied all the reception centers and transferred the refugees in the settlements. Now, a lot of these reception centers are used as quarantine centers now, in fact. Physical distancing during food distribution is being implemented fairly well, not always upstream, i.e. very often we have seen long queues, a bit congested before the how do you call that, the distribution system itself, but we're trying to handle that. But otherwise, at the point of distributions, I've been to many of them recently, there is physical distancing that is implemented. So this is happening, and the refugees, I should say, are fairly, yes, they are complying with that. The problem is more when they wait outside, where they still a bit too crowded. But it is happening, and people are getting aware. They are realizing that what we're asking them to do is for their own good.
And as we conclude, perhaps it's a second last question. What is your opinion? What are your takeaway from this pandemic, and what can we learn from this pandemic?
That's a very important question, I think, Sheila, if I may. What we have learned here is that we cannot rely too much on only our presence and that of our partners to support the refugees and host communities. So we have learned, and we're already going in that direction, that we need to accelerate the reinforcing the local authorities so they take more on board on their shoulder. So we have to support them more so that they increase their capacity. So we have to rely more on local authorities and local structure, like the refugee welfare committees, the refugee leadership structure. We have to, second thing, that we have to integrate more the basic services that we are offering to the refugees into the national ones. We were going down that road, we have got to accelerate as well. For example, in one of the settlements called Ramwanja, we handed over the maintenance of the water system to the Water and Sewage Corporation. So, and we need to multiply that, we need to increase that. So we need to continue in that direction and accelerate. I would say, third, we need to do more and more livelihood. Because at one point we withdrew from livelihood for lack of funding, but now we have to come back because when you have a crisis like that, if you don't, with a lockdown, if you don't offer the refugees a minimum of a cushion, then hardship comes immediately because job get lost right away. So again, we'll rely more on the local authorities and local structures, rely more on national systems and more livelihood. And try also probably to rely less and less on our own presence when it comes to education. So try to do a mixture of distance learning with a more traditional way of doing education. Probably we have to go down that road too.
Perhaps the last question, Mr. Bocho, is some people have been asking, what has the UNHCR as the UN agency or UN body done towards COVID-19, particularly UNHCR as a UN body?
So what we have done, particularly, so we have done a lot of training, obviously, of health staff in how to respond, but already we had a pretty fertile ground because let's not forget that a few months before the pandemic, we were still preparing for Ebola response. So basically, a system was already in place a bit in terms of screening of people. So we have been supporting the screening at border points. That's one. We have been supporting and financing the multiplication of wash stands to wash your hands. We've been supporting the reinforcement of the quarantine center. We're managing for the moment over 20 quarantine centers, we and our partners that we finance. That's what we have been doing. And we have also increased our delivery of basic items such as soap, because during COVID-19, soap is an essential component. So we multiply by 2 our distribution of soap. So that's, I would say, plus, of course, we have been contributing transport for the ministry at district level and central level in terms of ambulances, motorcycle, and so on. And we've been supporting, and we intend to increase support to what we call the village health teams. These are the sort of primary healthcare workers who are crucial during outbreak of disease. And we intend to continue in that direction and even increase our support to the village health teams.
What message do you want to leave for Ugandans watching this evening? Hello?
Hello?
Yes. What message do you have for Ugandans? What's your parting shot as we conclude?
My parting shot. My parting shot first indeed is, as I said before, a big thank you to Uganda, to Ugandans for what they are doing for the refugees. That's one. My second parting shot is to say that Ugandans, the government also is right to see refugees as an accelerator of development. And I think we see that in the refugee hosting district, that because of the presence of refugees, there has been an acceleration of development. And I think it was a very good bet, I would say, from the government. Not only generosity, but also seeing that refugees can be actors of development. They're not only a burden. So I have a lot of admiration and respect both to the government and to the Ugandan population for this. And my last point would be to say that we're here, UNHCR, with Uganda, with the refugees, and we're here to stay with you as long as the refugees are here. We're never going to give up, whether we have resources or not. We will continue to be with you to deliver together, for the refugees and the host communities.
All right, thank you so much, Joel Butru, the UNHCR Country Representative. Thank you so much for according us your time. And
You're
of
welcome.
course, just a reminder to our viewers that next week is World Refugee Day. And more than ever, I think we should do our part, play our part as citizens. And we've heard that there's, of course, a plea for finances, and where we can, he has said, there will be availing bank accounts where we can make a contribution. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you
very much for your time. All right, so that has been Sheila's Digitalks for this weekend, or the Sunday. Thank you so much for your company. We do apologize for the late start, and a few challenges with the different platforms, Instagram and LinkedIn. We obviously could only work within what we avail technologically, but we promise to do better next week or next weekend. And speaking of which, next weekend we shall be talking about the impact of COVID-19, again about COVID-19, but also how the entertainment industry has been hit by COVID-19, but also how they can come out of this abyss when COVID-19 is done. I'll be hosting APAS, the musician, and of course 2 other guests that I'll be communicating to you in the course of the week. So I hope that you can join us then. Again, the Sheila's Digitalks are powered by Jumia Uganda, and this is really in response to what COVID has sort of left behind, the trail that COVID-19 is leaving behind for us, that we should be able to work from anywhere. And the idea here is that we use technology and we use the remoteness that we have been availed by COVID to bring information, to bring knowledge and different guests to you, that we shouldn't really rely on either radio stations or TVs. We really want to utilize online to be able to tell as many stories as possible. And if you have any suggestions for guests that you want to watch or hear from, kindly drop me a DM and we shall be able to bring them on Sheila's Digitalks. Thank you so much. Again, I really, really want to thank Yona, who is the social media associate at UNHCR. Yona, if you're watching, thank you so much for making this possible. Thank you for the hack. Yona, thank you so much. I wish I could say more, but please go and follow him on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. He shares a lot of resourceful material on digital and technology. So if you're interested in content creation, online content creation, kindly go and follow Kundane Yona. Please, 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 I beg you. You will not regret. He is a social media associate at UNHCR, and he is definitely the brains. And hey, Yona, I'm going to dedicate a whole show to you. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your company, everyone that joined us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Apologies to the guys on Instagram because those have been my #1 ride or die. That's where we started, and unfortunately today we couldn't have them. But also to really stress that we are going to continue testing the system, and we hope that it gets better with time. Thank you so much. I think that's pretty much it for this weekend. I hope to see you again next week on Sunday, where we shall be speaking to APAS and other stakeholders in the entertainment industry on how they can rise out of this COVID-19. For me, Shurandu and the rest of the team, including my sister over there, it's have a good evening.